man is on his knees in the dust. His son is behind him, somewhere on the ground, convulsing, foam at the mouth, eyes rolled back. The disciples tried to help. They couldn't. Now the man is looking up to Jesus with the most honest prayer you will ever hear in all of Scripture. Not a polished prayer, not a theological statement, not a creed recited in a quiet sanctuary. Just a broken sentence from a broken man. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. 6 words, half confession, half cry, both at the same time. We are going to come back to this man. We are going to sit with him in the dust, but not yet, because before we can understand what he said, we need to understand what faith actually is. And the only way to do that is to look at what faith is not. Because in our generation, perhaps more than any other, we have confused faith with certainty. We have confused faith with feeling. We have confused faith with the arrival of a sign that finally makes believing feel safe. And that confusion is costing us everything. The memory text for this week's lesson is Hebrews 11:1, and it reads like this. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see, not things we have seen, not things we can prove on a whiteboard, not things that feel emotionally certain on a Tuesday afternoon. Things we cannot see. Stay with me, because this is where the lesson begins. It is AD 29, roughly. Jesus and his disciples have just crossed the Sea of Galilee by boat. They land on the other side, and a group of Pharisees are already waiting. They are not waiting to welcome him. They are waiting to test him. They want a sign. Now understand what this moment means. These men have already heard reports of water turned to wine. They have heard about lepers cured at a word. They have heard about a paralyzed man who walked out of his own house carrying the mat he had been lying on for years. And still, they want a sign. Mark 8:12 says Jesus sighed deeply in his spirit. That phrase, in the original Greek, carries a weight that the English barely captures. It is not a polite exhale. It is the sound of grievance. The sound of someone who loves deeply and is watching that love be refused. Here's what most people miss. The Pharisees were not stupid men. They were not ignorant. They were the most educated religious leaders in the region. They had the Torah memorized. They had Josephus's world around them. The politics of Roman occupation, the messianic expectation burning through every synagogue in Galilee. They had every intellectual reason to look at Jesus and at least consider the possibility. But signs were not what they needed. Ellen White, writing in The Desire of Ages, made the observation that what they lacked was not intellectual enlightenment, it was spiritual renovation. That is a phrase worth pausing on. Spiritual renovation. Not more information, no more miracles, not a more impressive display. A renovation, something torn down and rebuilt from the inside. And here is the uncomfortable question this raises for every one of us. How often do we come to God as the Pharisees came? Not necessarily in hostility, but in a kind of quiet demand. Give me a sign. Help me feel something. Let me see something move. Then I will trust you. Maybe you have never said those words aloud, but maybe you have prayed the long silence of someone waiting for God to prove himself before you let yourself believe. Maybe you watched a situation collapse, a marriage, a health report, a door slammed shut, and somewhere underneath the grievance there was a small voice that said, if God were real, this would not be happening. You are not the first person to think that thought, and you will not be the last. But here is what the lesson presses us to consider. The Israelites in the wilderness had manna falling from the sky every morning. They watched the Red Sea split. They saw a pillar of fire leading them at night, and 40 days after Moses went up the mountain, They were worshiping a golden calf. Signs do not produce faith. They never have. They can reinforce faith. They can confirm faith, but they cannot create it. Because faith, the Greek word is pistis. It means trust, reliance, confident assurance, is not a response to seeing. It is a response to knowing who God is, knowing what He has already done, and choosing to lean the full weight of your life on that knowledge, even when the evidence in front of you says to do the opposite. Pay attention to this, because what comes next changes everything. Jesus leaves that confrontation with the Pharisees. He doesn't argue. He doesn't perform. He simply leaves. And then he goes north into Gentile territory, into a region called Tyre and Sidon, which for any good Jewish teacher was about as unlikely a destination as you could imagine. And he encounters a woman. She is not Jewish. She is Syrophoenician, a Canaanite woman, which means, to the disciples watching, she has no claim on Jesus at all, no covenant history, no synagogue membership, no theological pedigree. She is an outsider by every possible measure, and she is desperate. Her daughter is suffering. Text says the girl has an unclean spirit. Matthew 15:22 records the mother's cry, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me." Son of David. She uses the messianic title. She knows exactly who she is speaking to. The disciples want Jesus to send her away. She is making noise. She is making a scene. She is the wrong kind of person in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jesus initially says something that sounds harsh to our modern ears, that he was sent first to the lost sheep of Israel, and that it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. It is not a warm reply, and the woman knows it. But watch what she does next. She doesn't leave. She does not argue theology. She does not produce her credentials or appeal to her suffering. She simply agrees with him. And then she finds a way in through the very word he used against her. Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. That is one of the most remarkable sentences in the Gospels. She does not demand a feast. She asks for crumbs. She is saying, I know who I am. I know where I stand. And I know that what falls from your table by accident is more than enough to heal my daughter. Jesus' response is immediate. O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And the daughter was healed in that hour. Great. That is the word he uses. Not adequate. Not sufficient. Great. She came from outside the covenant. She had no formal claim, and she walked away with what the disciples, who had been following Jesus for months, had not yet earned. Here's the part nobody tells you. Faith, at its core, is not about how long you've been in church. It is not about how many verses you have memorized. It is not about how many years you have been serving or how clean your theological record is. It is about what you actually believe God can do, and whether you are willing to press toward Him, not because you deserve it, but because you know He is the only source of what you need. Now move with me across the landscape, because the next portrait is just as striking. A Roman centurion sends word to Jesus. Luke 7:1-10. This man is a soldier, a commander of 100 men. He is the occupying force. He is, in the eyes of devout Jews, the enemy. And yet the elders of the synagogue go to Jesus on his behalf and say, He is worthy. He loves our nation. He built us our synagogue. The centurion does not come himself. He sends friends with a message. Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. Say the word. He is a military man. He understands chain of command. He knows what it means when a word comes from a superior. It is done. It doesn't require verification. It doesn't require paperwork. The word of authority is sufficient. And he applies that logic, that beautiful, precise military logic, to Jesus. Jesus marvels. The Greek here is astonishing. The word is ethomazon. Jesus was amazed. The Son of God, who spoke the universe into existence, stops and is genuinely astonished by a Roman soldier's understanding of authority. I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. Not even in Israel, not among the disciples, not among the priests, not among the people who had grown up with the promises. A Roman soldier who understood that the word of Jesus was enough. And this is where it gets remarkable. Both of these people, the Syrophoenician woman and the Roman centurion, share a single quality. They were not performing faith. They were not demonstrating faith for an audience. They were simply acting on what they actually believed, quietly, specifically, and without demanding a prior guarantee. Let's go back on the water for a moment. It's nighttime. The Sea of Galilee is alive with wind. The disciples, several of whom are fishermen, men who have spent their lives on this water, are terrified. The boat is swamping, and Jesus is asleep in the stern. They wake him. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? That sentence tells you everything about where their faith is at that moment. Do you not care? Not Jesus. Please help. Not Lord, we trust you, but the situation is urgent. It is an accusation. It is the desperate cry of people who, in the crisis, have forgotten who is in the boat with them. Jesus stands. He speaks to the wind. He speaks to the water, and it stops. Not gradually. The text says there was a great calm, and then he turns to them. Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Mark 4:40. Still no faith. After everything they had seen, after following him through healing, after watching water turn to wine, still. The disciples' faith was not fake. It was real, but it was circumstantial. It worked when the circumstances cooperated. When the wind came up and the water came in, the faith went out the window. And I want to say something carefully here, because this is not meant to shame anyone. Most of us live our faith the way the disciples lived it on that boat. It is genuine. We mean it. We go to church, we pray, we study our Bibles, we try, and then the storm comes, and the first question out of our mouths is, do you not care? This question is not a sign of unbelief. It is a sign of humanity. The disciples asked it, Job asked it. The Psalms are full of it. Even Elijah, after the fire came down from heaven on Mount Carmel, ran from Jezebel and sat under a tree and said, "It is enough. Let me die." What matters is not that the storm shakes you. What matters is who you run to when it does. Hold that thought, because we are about to walk into the most important room in the New Testament. Hebrews 11 is the greatest roll call in the history of human faith. It begins with a definition that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And then, verse by verse, name by name, it walks you through a gallery of people who staked their lives on something they could not see. Noah built a boat for a flood that had never happened. The Hebrew word for what God told Noah, emunah, carries the weight of steadfast faithfulness, not a one-time decision, a posture held over decades. Noah built that ark for years before a single drop fell. Abraham left his homeland. He didn't know where he was going. Hebrews 11:8 says this plainly. He went out, not knowing where he was going. He packed up everything familiar, his culture, his language, his social network, and followed a voice toward a destination he could not map. Rahab hid the spies. She was a Canaanite woman in Jericho, a person the world would not have considered a candidate for the Hall of Faith. But she had heard what God had done for Israel, and she made a decision. She tied a scarlet cord in her window and trusted that the God of Israel would be true to his word. She was right. The writer of Hebrews says of all these people, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth." Strangers and exiles. This phrase is not a lament. It is a theology. These people were not trying to be comfortable in a world that was not their home. They were moving through it, purposefully, faithfully, towards something they had not yet arrived at. And then verse 40 says something that should stop you in your tracks. God had something better in mind, and these heroes of faith would not be made perfect apart from us. Apart from us. You are part of this story. You are not an observer in the gallery. You are on the wall. Your name belongs in that list, not because your faith is large or impressive or unshaken by storms, but because faith does not require perfection. It requires direction. It requires that you are moving toward God, even when you are limping, even when you are soaking wet in a sinking boat, even when all you can say is half a prayer in the dust. Now watch what happens next. We go back to that man on his knees. His name is not given in the text. He is simply a man from the crowd, which is exactly the point. He is every man. He is every woman who has sat in a hospital room and wondered if God was listening. He is every person who has prayed the same prayer for the 20th time and seen nothing change. He comes to Jesus because his son is suffering, because the disciples couldn't help, because there is nowhere else to go. And when Jesus asks him how long this has been happening, the Father says, "Since childhood." Since childhood. This was not a sudden crisis. This was a life. This was years of watching his son destroyed by something he could not fight and could not fix. And then Jesus says to him, "All things are possible for one who believes." And the Father opens his mouth, and what comes out is not a triumphant confession. It is not a declaration of spiritual victory. It is the most honest sentence a human being has ever spoken to God. "I believe. Help my unbelief." Not "I believe and therefore I have no doubt." Not "I believe and I have passed the test." "I believe and I am not there yet." "I believe and I need you to fill in what is missing." "I believe, and that belief is small and cracked and insufficient, and I am handing it to you anyway, because you are the only one who can do anything with it." This is faith, not the absence of doubt, not the presence of certainty, not the performance of confidence for an audience. It is the act of pressing toward God with what you actually have, cracked and incomplete as it may be. And Jesus does not turn him away. Jesus does not say, "Come back when you have more faith." He does not say, "Your faith is insufficient." He casts the demon out. He heals the boy. He takes the broken prayer of a desperate father and honors it as though it were the prayer of Abraham, because to God it was. Revelation 14:12 describes the people of God in the last days with two qualities. They keep the commandments of God, and they have the faith of Jesus, not faith in Jesus, the faith of Jesus. The faith he exercised, the posture he modeled. The way he moved through a world of suffering and injustice and misunderstanding without ever losing his grip on the Father's character. Even in Gethsemane, when the sweat was falling like drops of blood and the cup was before him, he prayed, "Not my will, but yours." That is the faith we are being invited into. Not a faith that avoids suffering, not a faith that demands to be exempted from difficulty, a faith that holds on to the character of God even when the circumstances of life are screaming something different. Here are 3 things I want you to carry out of this lesson. First, faith is not generated by you. It is a gift. Ephesians 2:8 makes this clear. God has already deposited a measure of faith in every human being. Your only job is to respond to it. to open what He has already placed in your hands. You are not building faith from scratch. You are exercising what has already been given. Second, faith grows through use, not through waiting. The disciples' faith did not grow because they sat in the boat thinking about faith. It grew because they got out of the boat, because they followed, because they failed, because they watched Jesus do what they could not do, because they came back again the morning after they ran away. The great cloud of witnesses in Hebrews 11 are not people who felt strong. They are people who acted despite feeling weak. And third, the one I want to leave you with, the most powerful prayer you will ever pray may be the most incomplete one. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. That prayer is not a failure. It is the foundation. It is the admission that what you have is not enough, and you are bringing it to the only one who can multiply it. The Syrophoenician woman came with nothing and asked for crumbs. The centurion came with a soldier's logic and asked for a word. The father came with half a belief and asked for help with the other half. Jesus honored all three. He will honor yours too. The Hebrew word emunah, often translated as faith or faithfulness, does not describe a single moment of belief. It describes a posture sustained over time. A tree that keeps leaning toward the light through every season, in drought, in frost, in the long winters when nothing seems to grow. You do not need to have it all figured out. You do not need to silence every doubt. You do not need to wait until you feel something before you act. You only need to lean. Lean toward the one who has already given you every reason to believe. Lean toward the word that has never failed. Lean toward the God who sighed deeply at a generation that refused to trust Him, and who also, in the very same breath, healed the boy in the dust because a broken man leaned toward Him and said what little he had. Faith is not the absence of the storm. It is the choice to remember who is in the boat. Stay in the boat. Keep leaning. And when you cannot find the words, say the only ones that matter. Lord, I believe.